Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, es kann kein Zufall sein, dass heute auch der zweite Arbeitsgruppenbericht des Weltklimarates UNIPCC vorgestellt wurde. Wir schauen uns heute einen anderen, aber zusammenhängenden Report, den Circularity Gap Report 2022, genauer an. Dieser gibt einen umfassenden Einblick in die weltweiten Materialströme und die wichtigsten Hebel zur Erreichung der Kreislaufwirtschaft. Außerdem unterstützt er Entscheidungsträgerinnen mit globalen Daten und einer Vermessung der Kreislaufwirtschaft, um ihre Maßnahmen zu lenken. Herzlich willkommen zu Mind the Gap. Wo ist die Lücke im Kreislauf am Deck 50 des Naturhistorischen Museums und vor den Bildschirmen? Ich bin Bernhard Zlanner-Bittnik, Leiter des EU-Umweltbüros und Vizepräsident des European Environmental Bureau. Wir freuen uns sehr über das große Interesse. Seit der Erstausgabe 2018 hat sich die Zirkularitätslücke noch vergrößert. Nur 9% der Wirtschaft sind zirkulär. Seit dem Club of Rome-Bericht zu den Grenzen des Wachstums 1972 hat sich der weltweite Materialverbrauch vervierfacht. Wir widmen uns daher der Frage, wie kann man Kreislaufwirtschaft und Klimaschutz gemeinsam denken und umsetzen und damit auch die Nachhaltigkeitsziele der Agenda 2030 erreichen.
Es gibt nun zunächst eine Keynote mit Matthew Fraser und im Anschluss daran eine Podiumsdiskussion mit der Generaldirektorin des Naturhistorischen Museums, Katrin Wohland, der Executive Director des Circular Economy Forum Austria, Karin Huber-Heim, dem Universitätsprofessor der Bodenkultur Willi Haas, Matthias Neitsch, Geschäftsführer von Repanet und Karl Kinzel als hochrangigen Vertreter des Bundesministeriums für Klimaschutz. Ich darf Sie noch darauf hinweisen, dass Fotos und Videos gemacht werden. Wenn Sie das nicht wünschen, bitte sich im Anschluss bei uns zu melden und wir löschen sie natürlich raus. Alle Panel-Teilnehmerinnen tragen keine Maske, weil sie Corona-negativ getestet sind und leider, weil die Maßnahmen noch nicht aufgehoben worden sind, gibt es kein Buffet im Anschluss. Ein ganz großes Dankeschön, bevor wir starten, den Mitorganisatorinnen, dem Klimaschutzministerium in Personen Sektionschef Christian Holzer und Karl Kinzel vom Kabinett der Bundesministerin, dem Naturhistorischen Museum, Repanet, dem Club of Rome, dem Umweltdachverband und natürlich der Circle Economy. Dies ist auch eine Wachstum in Wandel Veranstaltung. Ein ebenso großes Dankeschön den helfenden Händen und natürlich, wie schon erwähnt, dem Deck 50 des Naturhistorischen Museums. Und ich darf nun an die Gastgeberin übergeben, an die Generaldirektorin Katrin Wohland.
Ja, sehr geehrter Herr Sektionschef Holzer, sehr geehrter Herr Zlanner-Bittnik, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Was seit Jahrzehnten nicht ernst genommen wurde, die Mahnung eines sparsameren Umgangs mit unseren planetaren Ressourcen, ist seit letzten Donnerstag knallharte Realpolitik. Gas und Öl werden teuer. Nicht nur ist der Preis für die Umwelt bekanntermaßen hoch, auch der politische Preis ist unerschwinglich geworden. Die globalen Nachhaltigkeitsziele, Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, sind, so wie hier, auf einem farbenfrohen Kreis abgebildet. Alle Länder dieser Erde, auch Russland, haben ihnen zugestimmt. Die blaue Farbe steht für das Ziel Frieden. Die SDGs sind untereinander verlinkt, in Teilbereichen sogar widersprüchlich. Es gibt Zielkonflikte zwischen Wirtschaftswachstum, Ernährung, Klimaschutz und Biodiversität. Es gibt aber noch mehr Synergien. Moorschutz und nachhaltige Bodenbearbeitung beispielsweise und überhaupt die Reduktion des Flächenverbrauchs. Flächen für Energiepflanzen und Fasern, Flächen für Tagebau und Fabriken, Flächen für Müllhalden und Infrastrukturen. Der hohe Flächenverbrauch ist ein Ausdruck unseres ineffizienten Wirtschaftsweise. Eine Linderung verspricht die Kreislaufwirtschaft, ein Arbeiten gegen die Entropie. Der Entropiegrad würde die Ressourcen- und Energieverschwendung besser abbilden als CO2-Äquivalente, ist aber noch schwerer greifbar. Rohstoffe wiedergewinnen, die unsere natürlichen Grundlagen erhalten und die internationalen Abhängigkeiten zu reduzieren, das lässt sich gut greifen. Ich persönlich kenne das Thema Kreislaufwirtschaft schon länger. Der Club of Rome wurde 1968 gegründet und veröffentlichte seinen aufsehenerregenden Bericht zu den Grenzen des Wachstums im Jahr 1972. Der Weltklimarat, gerade erwähnt, IPCC, wurde bereits 1988 gegründet und hat, kleine Nebenbemerkung, im Jahr 2007 den Friedensnobelpreis erhalten. Seitdem ist viel passiert, aber nicht genug. Viele der positiven Entwicklungen gingen auf ein Zusammenspiel von Wissenschaft, Politik und Zivilgesellschaft zurück. So freue ich mich, dass wir hier auf dem Deck 50, einem Ort im Naturhistorischen Museum Wien für Wissenschaftskommunikation und Deliberation, nicht nur gemeinsam mit dem Bundesministerium für Klimaschutz, Umwelt, Energie, Mobilität, Innovation und Technologie, dem EU-Umweltbüro und dem Club of Rome Austria eine gemeinsame Veranstaltung durchführen, sondern dass auch RepairNet, das Netzwerk für Reparaturwerkstätten und Aktivitäten, beteiligt ist. Initiativen wie RepNet ermächtigen Bürgerinnen und Bürger und leisten damit einen wichtigen Beitrag zur nötigen Transformation hin zu einer stärkeren Kreislaufwirtschaft. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit und ein gutes und nachhaltiges Gelingen.
Ich darf mich selber noch ganz kurz vorstellen. Mein Name ist Christian Holzer. Ich darf im Klimaschutzministerium die Sektion für Umwelt- und Kreislaufwirtschaft leiten. Passt, glaube ich, ganz gut zur heutigen Veranstaltung. Darf auch die Grüße unserer Frau Bundesministerin Leonore Gewessler übermitteln, die sich im Augenblick in Brüssel befindet. Wir haben ja abseits der Pandemie auch sonst noch sehr, sehr schwierige Zeiten. Da geht es um Energiefragen, um Gasversorgung etc. Aber nichtsdestotrotz freue ich mich, dass wir uns hier heute auch im Naturhistorischen Museum über die Kreislaufwirtschaft unterhalten können. Die diversen Circularity Gap Reports zeigen ja ganz klar, dass wir uns in einer linearen Welt befinden. Wir haben, egal welche Reports man jetzt hernimmt und wie stark auch oder das Zustandekommen dort oder da kritisiert werden kann, aber wir sind jedenfalls unter 10% und das ist eigentlich ein Wahnsinn, dass alle Ressourcen, die auf dieser Welt in Umlauf sind, zu maximal 10% rezykliert werden bzw. einem neuerlichen Leben zugeführt werden. Zeitgleich sind wir konfrontiert mit Klimakrise, Zerstörung von Ökosystemen, Biodiversitätsverlust etc. All das zeigt auf, dass wir neben vielen anderen Tools auch ganz klar das Tool der Kreislaufwirtschaft brauchen. Die Europäische Kommission hat ja im März 2020 einen neuen Aktionsplan für die Kreislaufwirtschaft auf den Weg gebracht. Der ist nicht nur unserer Meinung nach, sondern auch vieler Expertinnen und Experten ein wesentlicher Bestandteil, ein wesentlicher Baustein des New Green Deal. Und es geht jetzt darum, diesen Plan auf den Weg zu bringen. Der Plan selbst hat ja verschiedene Zugänge. Es werden verschiedene Maßnahmenpakete geschnürt, zum Beispiel, auch wenn das vielleicht immer wieder mal untergeht, der Schutz oder beziehungsweise die Einräumung von mehr Rechten für Verbraucherinnen. Da geht es zum Beispiel um das Recht auf Reparatur etc. Aber natürlich, und das ist wahrscheinlich der zentrale Bestandteil, eine nachhaltige Produktionspolitik. Alles, was bereits einmal produziert ist, können wir unter Umständen, wenn es schadstoffbelastet ist, wenn es nicht recyclingfähig ist, nur mehr unter einem großen Aufwand wieder der Wirtschaft beziehungsweise der Ressourcennutzung zuführen. Das heißt, dem wird auch ein großer Schwerpunkt im Rahmen der Arbeit der Europäischen Kommission gewidmet werden, sei das jetzt über eine Weiterentwicklung der Ökodesign-Richtlinie, die sich derzeit ja ausschließlich mit Energieeffizienzfragen beschäftigt und darüber hinaus eben weiterentwickelt werden soll in Richtung Design for Recycling und Design for Reuse, was viele Produktgruppen anbelangt. Hier warten wir natürlich auf die Vorschläge der Kommission und dann auf die Zusammenarbeit der 27 Mitgliedstaaten, um das auf den Weg zu bringen. Wir haben aber in Österreich auch, wenn ich das so sagen darf, erkannt, dass die Transformation der Gesellschaft, die Energiewende nicht nur alleine durch erneuerbare Energien geleistet werden kann, sondern dass die Kreislaufwirtschaft einen wesentlichen Baustein auch dieser Transformation darstellen wird müssen, weil wir sonst unsere Klimaziele mit Sicherheit nicht erreichen, wenn wir nicht in der Kreislaufwirtschaft etwas weiterbringen. Deswegen hat sich das Klimaschutzministerium dafür entschieden, neben einer umfassenden Klima- und Energiestrategie auch eine umfassende Kreislaufwirtschaftsstrategie zu erarbeiten. Aber da erzähle ich Ihnen wahrscheinlich nichts Neues, weil diese Strategie ja bereits im Jänner zur allgemeinen Begutachtung aufgelegen ist und wir derzeit gerade die Stellungnahmen einarbeiten und hoffen, dass wir Ihnen eine fertige Strategie schon am 22. März im Rahmen einer Veranstaltung in der Aula der Wissenschaften präsentieren können. Wir arbeiten auch daran, hier ein gemeinsames Commitment der ganzen Bundesregierung zustande zu bringen über einen Ministerratsvortrag, auch wenn das deswegen noch nicht rechtsverbindlich ist, aber dem Ganzen doch ein größeres Gewicht verliehen wird, wenn sich die ganze Bundesregierung dazu bekennt. Wir haben allerdings auch, und das ist, denke ich, auch eine frohe Botschaft, begonnen, diverse Förderungsmöglichkeiten aufzubauen, schon im Jahr 2021 mit der FDI-Initiative Kreislaufwirtschaft, wo wir schon mehr als 8 Millionen Euro ausgeschüttet haben und mit dem vorangegangene Woche im Parlament beschlossenen Novelle zum Umweltförderungsgesetz muss noch kommende Woche den Bundesrat durchlaufen, aber dann wird es im Bundesgesetzblatt stehen, geben wir nicht nur über die Recovery Resilience Facility der Europäischen Kommission entsprechende Mittel frei, sondern darüber hinaus auch nationale Mittel, die diese Transformation beschleunigen sollen. Insofern freue ich mich sehr und bedanke mich auch ausdrücklich beim Club of Rome Austrian Chapter für diese Veranstaltung. Ich glaube, man kann gar nicht oft genug über die Kreislaufwirtschaft sprechen, beziehungsweise über die Grenzen des Wachstums und das Bewusstsein diesbezüglich bei allen zu schärfen. Vielen herzlichen Dank und eine schöne Veranstaltung.
Vielen Dank, Herr Holzer, für die einleitenden Worte, und I will now ask Matthew to, the floor is yours, and you will present us the key findings of the report. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. I've prepared a small presentation, and really just to walk through some of the key findings, but also tell you a little bit about the work that we do at the Circularity Gap Reporting Initiative. Actually, 3 years ago, we published our first national analysis here in Austria. We found that Austria was 9.1% circular, so slightly beating the world at 8.6%. But yeah, Matthew Fraser, I'm heading the research and development at Circular Economy, but also leading the Circularity Gap Reporting Initiative itself. Just a quick word on our organization. We're a foundation based out of the Netherlands, about 50 people, quite international, and we really are driven towards impact. So I think in my corner of the company, we're really looking at metrics, looking at data, how we can put that to work to really provide governments and key decision makers at a national level, really how to make the best policies and really, but we also work with cities, businesses, regions, and really just try to drive the practical implementation toward the circular economy. I want to start off with one simple small graph that I'm sure that we're all very familiar with. It's the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. No big deal. But what can we say about this trend? It's an exponential curve. It's quite an alarming trend. Obviously, we've been very slow at a global level to react to it. I think now we are seeing promising signs of governmental coordination. But we also see that, action now will also take decades, honestly, to really see an effect. And specifically looking at the Paris Climate Accord, to achieve 1.5 degrees is really calling on a global transformation of our energy system, and to be honest, probably quite a lot more. I would just want to impress upon you the magnitude, the seriousness of this trend, but also the fact that this is just one trend. If we look actually around the world today, we see that we're living in a period of exponential times. We're seeing exponential growth in everything from, indeed, GHG emissions in the atmosphere, freshwater consumption, biodiversity loss. Not to overwhelm everybody, but there are a lot of things going on, and I think as much as clearly we want to get the climate crisis under control, there's also a risk that just focusing on renewables, just focusing on energy efficiency, on these sort of micro levers, even though they're extrapolated at a global scale, we are at risk of missing a bit of a bigger picture, a bit of a bigger story. So how do we understand this bigger picture without completely getting overwhelmed? I think actually that Kate Raworth, in her book Donut Economics, actually has quite an elegant, let's say, conceptual framework for how we can really think about development in the 21st century. So, instead of just growth and maximizing output and, even green growth, we're really trying to understand a little bit of kind of what is this optimization space in the middle, right? I mean, we have human needs, sort of basic access to quality goods on the inside, and that goes for everybody. And on the sort of upper side, on the outer side, we also have very hard limits for ecological health. So in a sense, what we're really talking about is sort of what is this safe operating space where we can really begin to tweak and adjust the quality of the quality of development rather than sort of the growth of development, let's say. So I think this is a really interesting and actually accurate conceptual framework that I like a lot, and I think within Circle Economy, within our organization, we're also adopting this framing more and more. But obviously, when you look at this picture, it's not a good one. So just for those that don't know, there are 9 planetary boundaries. These are the outside of the circle. Out of the 9, we've crossed 4. I read a paper, I think last month, that offers some evidence that we've actually crossed 5. The problem is it's quite difficult to really get data in a reliable way to really understand where these thresholds are. But I think if we've learned anything from climate change, going back to that small graph, just one simple trend can actually have a lot of rebound effects and compound effects and feedback loops on all kinds of systems around the world. At the same time, we're not doing that great of a job on meeting our social needs as well. In this part of the world, it's definitely not that much of a problem, but I think if you have a global scope, you'll see that we really are actually falling short of really meeting at least quality needs for everybody around the world. So maybe this talk isn't getting off to the best start. I'm throwing a lot of complicated information at you, a lot of indicators, a lot of dimensions to our the crises that we face. But what if there's sort of one missing piece in the middle that actually brings this all together? What could be that missing piece? So on one hand, we have our ecological limits. We have to stay within them. On the other hand, we have a social foundation, things that we want to achieve at least a bare minimum, and obviously try to optimize over the long term. I think for me, obviously the missing piece here is material. And it's really actually this interesting material story of how we year on year take stuff from the environment, how we manipulate it, push it through different production systems, and ultimately use it to satisfy our societal needs, from housing, mobility, nutrition, goods and services, communication, etc. Now, interestingly enough, actually, this is the work that we do at the Circularity Gap Reporting Initiative. It's just that from the origins, from the basis of the Circularity Gap Reporting Initiative, we're really focused on cycling. How do we cycle more? And I've heard that now a couple times in the introduction, trying to maximize cycling. And yes, that's absolutely an important part. And that's actually the metric that we use. So when I said 9.1% circular for Austria, what we're actually measuring here is what is the percent of cycled materials over the total input. And that's actually where we get that metric. But that's not really telling the whole story. And if we open this up a little bit more, and this is actually something that we do with modeling, and this is something that we're able to do once we build a bit of an economic picture, a macroeconomic picture of a nation, or in this case, the globe. These are actually the levers that we begin to play around with, and these are the levers that are in play when we introduce circular economy strategies. So, not sure that everybody can see that, but narrow, so actually how do we use less to get the same output? How do we slow things down? Think about, extending the lifetime of goods. Of course, cycling is a very important part, but also regenerate. So actually, how do we draw more from regenerative systems and minimize extraction of non-renewable resources? So this is actually the work that we do, and I would also maybe kind of at this moment point out that this is also a moment of humility for me. So 5 years ago, it was a very different story with circular economy. We just didn't have the data to really show even how circular the world was. We threw some data together, actually with a lot of help from friends in the audience, and we came up with this number. And it's been successful. I think it's really drawn attention. It served its purpose in bringing attention to how linear the world is. Yet at the same time, there's really more to this story. And I think if we are going to follow this framing, it really is about optimization. How do we optimize our societies going forward? And I think I've been inspired by a few recent papers that have also used the term provisioning systems. So actually, if you think of, just to run a quick thought experiment, I live and I work in Amsterdam, probably the world's most famous cycling city, where you can walk or cycle across the city easily within 15 minutes, not a problem, and a bike is an old piece of steel built in, at least my bike, from the 1930s. I repair it maybe once every couple of years, and the city is very dense. Now, kind of move in your mind to sort of the middle of America, a huge, almost mansion-sized homes, 2 or more cars, highways everywhere. I mean, it's just insane the amount of material intensity that's needed to provide the same kind of needs. And actually, to be honest, I think we would all probably be in agreement in the room as Europeans that Europeans generally have a higher quality of life. There's a higher degree of connectedness. There's an ease that comes with being able to move, and there's a freedom that comes with that. So I guess the point that I would want to make here is all this interesting spaghetti in the middle is actually, I think, where we get to make the magic happen, and actually where we get to implement and begin to twist optimal circular solutions. So this event obviously has a big focus on climate. 2 years ago, we published a report, a global circularity gap report, really actually for the first time exploring, what is the interface between circular economy and climate change, and what role could there be? We actually approached it quite openly, not really knowing what we could find, and being quite open to the results. And maybe what I can do is I can walk you through this picture quickly. On the left-hand side, we have the main resource groups that we use on Earth, right? So fossil fuel carriers, minerals, ores, biomass. And what you're looking at with every slice is the embodied emissions associated with those resource groups at every stage of the economy. So what we see obviously in the beginning is that about 65% of embodied emissions is really associated with fossil fuel energy carriers. But what's interesting is when we begin to move right along the picture into the economy, where we begin to process materials, you can see by these little lightning bolts the flows that are associated with energy. Obviously, we use energy for everything. I mean, it's deeply embodied in literally every dimension of the things that we do. But if we follow this story, actually what you see is that a lot of energy, step after step, gets embodied in the material stuff that we see around us, right? The chair, the microphone, the floor, the building, etc. And actually, if you keep following that, so I mean, here we have almost 100% embodied emissions due to, well, fossil fuel carriers, and about 20% biomass, usually due to land use emissions change. But as we move forward, you see that those lightning bolts actually become less and less, and by the final stage, the picture is almost flipped completely. there's so much energy and so much embodied emissions, I should say, embodied in the stuff that we have, the cars, again, all the stuff that we have. And really what's kind of left in terms of direct energy use, we have here, transportation and energy use in homes, the heating and the lighting that's happening right now. And that's really how we meet our societal needs. So right now, if you look at kind of how we're addressing the climate crisis, it's very much on sort of final energy use and how to become more efficient with that. And obviously there are big cascade effects that can contribute to the earlier stages here, but I think we're missing that big picture, and I think that this very sort of colorful end of the spaghetti over here is actually what I'd really like to draw your attention to. I think that's really where circular economy has a huge role to play. So again, kind of going back to this equation, right? So environmental, ecological limits on one side, human needs on the other, resource groups in the middle. I think it comes as no surprise that fossil fuels really carry the most embodied emissions. But if we kind of look at a needs level, sure, there are things that really stand out, right? So housing, mobility, to an extent nutrition kind of stand out as sort of obvious needs that are quite emissions intensive. But actually, all needs actually have quite a lot of embodied emissions. So how do we begin to go back to that idea of kind of maybe circular provisioning systems? How do we manipulate the flows within society actually to create a more circular economy? And in this case, what is the resulting impact on emissions? So this was the main work that we did back in 2021, and we updated it slightly in this year's report. But we tried to kind of stack together, what are the different circular economy solutions that we could apply to the different needs? So from housing, nutrition, mobility, consumer goods, et cetera. How would they all kind of stack up, and what would it do by implementing all of these solutions at a global scale, both to circularity, but also in terms of emissions reduction? So let me just break this down a little bit. And I think this is actually where it gets exciting, because sure, there are individual solutions, and maybe just as a bit of a legend to read this map, the height of the, what do you want to call this, a little blob, is increase in material cycling. So this strategy would increase material cycling by so much. The width is actually showing the emissions reduction potential. And actually, in reality, a lot of these solutions overlap with one another, but let's just go through a few of them. I think looking at resource-efficient construction, for a first example, I think if we look at sort of the cutting edge in the building industry today, so much is really being done by computers, where you can deeply parameterize all the different parts and components and materials and their performance actually within a building before anybody has laid the first brick. The interesting thing there is that actually we gain control, a huge amount of control in the design phase before we start building, to know exactly maybe how that building could be modified later. So maybe in some alternate future, this becomes 2 apartments. How could we do that at sort of most material efficiency? Also looking at renewable energy, renewable materials rather than steel or concrete, which are hugely emissions intensive. We tried to look at all of these different solutions, and we tried to pack them into a sort of conceptual framework. But also just, think about how we use space in general, going back to my example of kind of downtown or, central European cities versus America. I mean, it's a radically different developmental model, but one that is inherently efficient. I mean, people in this city could live for hundreds, if not thousands of years walking and biking, and that carries a very little minimal material cost. If we look at mobility, for example, and I was having a really interesting discussion over lunch about this. I think, you know, I'm from Canada, so when I was a kid, I always liked the idea of having a fancy car. To be honest, now that I live in Europe, I don't really want to pay the cost, and it's not actually that efficient in the end. So sure, it's really fun to drive fast once a month, maybe. But, you know, I'd rather actually just app an Uber and just get, you know, somebody to take me where I want to go, and I don't have to pay anything else. Combine that with cars that are actually designed for longevity, designed for reuse, high-level reuse. What if we move to such a system where sort of car ownership basically all but disappears, but actually we use different vehicles for different purposes, all networked and all shared together? I think this is kind of what I mean when we get at provisioning systems. So it's definitely circular economy strategies looking at longevity, cycling, etc., but also at that systemic level, how do we implement it in society to really get those sort of deep, what they would call deep cuts, you know? And I think that's actually really exciting. And there's many examples here, and I think there's a healthy question and answer period, so I'm very happy to go into that. But maybe just to end, we've looked at all these different solutions across the different societal needs. We've tried to bundle them together in a modeling exercise, and we tried to look, you know, okay, if we basically implemented these at scale globally, where would that bring us? And actually, I realize I put in a slightly outdated graph, so the numbers are a little bit old. But if I get my my numbers right, I think basically the current NDCs, so the nationally determined contributions which each government puts forward, should bring us to about 2.4 degrees, if I'm correct. If we were to implement all of these circular economy strategies that I just mentioned, we could further reduce that by about 85%, so actually bringing the total emissions down to, well, let's say a total emissions reduction of about 39%, absolute. In terms of translating that to the Paris goals, that could actually bring us to the 1.5 degree goal that Paris has sent out. And I think, I mean, for me, that's really a moment of pause, because this window, you know, going back to that simple graph that I was showing you, that window is closing very fast. Like, we have very, very little time to act. And this is a huge lever. And it's a complicated lever. I mean, we're looking at, you know, reimagining the foundations of society in many ways. But, you know, I'm also quite hopeful, because all of these solutions that I mentioned to you exist today. It's not that we need some sort of fancy technological fix, or you know, what we need is actually action and scale. It needs to be implemented, and we actually need that sort of clear vision of where we're going. So I think, for me, what's exciting is circular economy is actually bringing not only real but extremely valuable contributions to the climate debate that aren't really being talked about. And just to give you a sense there, when we published that report in 2021, we found really just a handful of 4 or 5 countries that actually had the words circular economy mentioned in their NDCs. This year, about 1/3 of all countries have circular economy mentioned somehow on NDCs. So we are gaining traction. But not enough. I mean, we really need action and scale to achieve these impacts, and the impacts are real, and I think it's quite an exciting message. So that kind of concludes a little bit the presentation of the findings, and I'm really happy to answer any questions that might come. So what do we do now? I mean, I think for me, obviously I'm concerned a little bit about, you know, the future of the Circularity Gap Reporting Initiative. I mean, you know, we've now shown this amazing result. We're able to do analyses for different countries. What do we do? I think one, and maybe just another point to sort of hammer home the importance of circular economy and achieving climate goals. The NDCs are sort of this nice orange pinkish color. Everything below that is what circular economy can deliver. And this is actually for a specific country. It's for the country of Laos. But that's almost double, right? I mean, just, you know, I'm not a a mathematician, I can't really do the math, but I mean, just looking at that, I mean, that's a huge deep cut that we're just not realizing and that we're actually not structurally building into our plans. I think calling on nations to really add circular economy to every NDC is something that we have to do. And that's very clear for the climate crisis. But also, how do we talk about circularity? I mean, I think this is also a bit of the geeky part of the lecture where I get to become a bit of a nerd. I mean, I just don't think that we're doing enough justice really framing the whole circular economy debate as well as we could have. And to be true, the objective is different than 5 years ago. I mean, I think we're now at a point where we're seeing the need for real structural solutions that go beyond sort of fixes like renewables. We need to look at sort of the nature of our economy, the goals, the structure of our economy and how we basically organize our lives on Earth. What I would propose is this, actually, is that we really focus on these 4, let's say, headline metrics. How are we doing every year on narrowing the total amount of materials that we need? How well are we drawing on renewable resources and ecological cycles? I think there's clearly a boundary there, especially when we look at land use and biodiversity, that we don't want to pressure that one too much. Slowing down, this is also an interesting conversation that we're having. I mean, you have great statistics on recycling, but almost no visibility on reuse. So if I take this chair, maybe do a few minor fixes and put it in a new building, I can't see that data. And that's actually a really key part of the circular economy, is how we can slow things down through reuse, repair, remanufacturing. And those sort of inner loops are completely hidden. And of course, cycle. So that's really coming back to the CGR metric. But that's really let's say the material core of the story. I think what I would really love to see is linking that to social foundation metrics, and I realize that there are a lot of, let's say, social impacts and social metrics, but at least looking at things like human health, labor and livelihoods, access to resources, quality of resources, and overall life satisfaction. I mean, these are essential metrics that I think we can say something about, or at least tie to the way that we use materials. And on the other hand, the planetary boundaries. As I started, we're transgressing over half. That trend isn't looking good. In fact, it's getting worse and way more volatile. We really need to understand how do we actually manipulate these materials to stay within those planetary boundaries. But finally, I think a third pillar here is understanding the drivers. So, great that I can, give you some metric by saying, doubling circularity can bring, Paris to reality. But, what do you do when you go home? I mean, if you work in the construction sector or the mobility sector or the government, what's in my sphere of influence? How do I actually affect those changes on a high level? And I think that's actually something that we really need to get into very clearly is what are the levers that we can all pull together, and actually how can we collaborate better? And I think that's an exciting message, because I think we all need action. I think, we're, every day over the past almost half decade, you open up the news and you just see the worst possible news that you could ever imagine, getting worse every day. So I think actually focusing on action can be a really worthwhile solution to, just really getting to work and keeping the vision clear on what we need to do. I would also just want to end going back a bit to the mission of the organization, which is the practical implementation of circular economy. So I'm really inspired by bringing these metrics to life by drawing on global and national data sets, but also looking at providing tools, online tools, data to everybody to actually find their own way of drawing insights, using this information to drive action. And I have just a small video.
Gemeinsam, Nations, which is co-created with 4 organizations, is a digital product that brings together the best data, knowledge, and insights to help nations accelerate their transition to a circular economy. Gemeinsam Nations is built on 3 key pillars: explore, scan, and act. A circular economy can contribute to many environmental and social goals, from net zero to social equality. Gemeinsam Nations lets you explore how your nation is performing on these goals and where circular economy approaches can help. What we see today is that no nation on Earth is fully meeting the needs of its population while operating within the means of the planet. Each nation has its own unique challenges, but many share a common set of opportunities. Gemeinsam Nations shows you how your nation is performing in relation to your peers and helps you identify what circular economy approaches can be utilized to achieve your goals. Drawing on robust data sets and methodologies, Gemeinsam Nations lets you scan your country to benchmark and monitor your progress towards a circular economy. Gemeinsam Nations uses official statistics to build a dashboard of metrics relevant to your nation. In addition to reporting on material circularity, we include metrics that measure the environmental and social dimensions of the circular economy. One of the crucial metrics is our circular jobs metric, which was developed in partnership with the United Nations Environment Program. Metrics like this can help policymakers and labor organizations to design evidence-based strategies based on which sectors have the most current circular activity and potential. Once you know how your country is performing, translating insights into action is crucial. Gemeinsam leverages specialized tools that you can use to take action, whether you are representing a city, a business, or a nation. Using the Knowledge Hub, discover the right circular economy strategies with a repository of over 3,000 case studies. Using Gemeinsam Cities, find tangible solutions that can be implemented and scaled at a city level. Using the Circle Assessment Tool, evaluate your progress on key circular strategies and discover opportunities to make your business more circular. From insights to action, Gemeinsam Nations helps your country accelerate its transition to a circular economy. To learn how we can help your country take the next step, visit www.circularity-gap.world.
What we're trying to do is actually develop an online platform where that data can live, where you can log on, you can find out what it looks like, what the situation looks like for Austria, and actually find solutions that you can implement and solutions that you can contribute to. So I think that's also a bit of the outlook for us is, sustainability has sort of, and circular economy being a part of that obviously is always been very complicated and always been very nuanced, but actually bringing data to life and by embracing digital solutions, it actually makes it easy, more intuitive, and it actually brings those tools to your fingertips. So we'll be launching this probably in March or April, and very happy for you to tune in on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the insights and the presentation. We have now a couple of minutes, 15 minutes max for questions. And I will ask my colleague Sebastian, he's here, he's on the other side with the mic, and just raise your hands if there are any questions from your side. There are also questions from the audience on YouTube. So I would give you the chance to start here, and if I don't see hands right now, there are some hands, or a lot of hands in this corner. Sebastian, please, you choose. I'll leave it over to you.
Thank you. So if I make the ice breaking, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for your extremely interesting presentation. My name is Thomas Jackel, and I'm also with the Ministry for Climate Change, and I'm part of this core team designing our circular economy national strategy. I very much appreciated your expression or your model or your vision of provisioning systems. And I would like just to share with you an observation we made in the designing process of our national strategy. And I think there are two main big obstacles against this understanding. One is coming from the industrial sector, producing basic industrial materials such as concrete or steel, why we have the impression for them it's very hard to accept this spirit of provisioning. On the other hand, they do have an approach towards the circular economy, but they see the secret is, let's just switch the base of our energy, make a green electricity, and then we got the solution. We make carbon capture and use of all with green electricity. So this is their reaction. They are not so familiar in acquainting the provisioning spirit, but they say, let's more or less let our materials streams stay the same, but let's switch the energy. And the second obstacle we were seeing is within civil society, that it's mainly a psychological thing. People sometimes love to obtain things, right? So, and I think these are two main issues we have to address in the transformation process of the circular economy. And just wanted to share these observations with you, and would be interested if you agree or if you care, whatever you say. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, indeed. Well, I mean, these industries are called hard to abate industries for a reason, and I think again. I would look towards kind of that optimization model where, you know, everything that you just mentioned is definitely a part of the solution. I think if we also look at, so for example, we just finished a report for the built environment in the Netherlands, and actually what we see is that there's a lot of concrete, a lot of minerals being taken from the built environment in demolition. But actually they're just being put under the road or kind of in suboptimal solutions. And there now actually are technological, let's say, fixes where we can actually extract higher value reuse. So I think, you know, again, looking at material substitution, making, you know, cleaner processes, but also really exploring higher value reuse, I think clearly there's good inroads there. But yeah, I appreciate the complexity of the problem.
Thank you very much. Sebastian, please another question on this side, and then we...
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matthew. First of all, thanks again for producing a circular economy, for producing those reports, because we actually need it. You touched upon it already 5 years ago. It was mostly assumptions. Now we have hard data. With this hard data, of course, we can build on strategies. My name is Martin Schneider. I work with EIT Climate Kick as a circular economy orchestrator. That's a fancy name, but I think, and I think this applies for most of the people here, that say the transition from millennial to circular economy is of utmost essence. In your presentation, you have touched upon, I think, very clearly about the why and about the what. And of course, there was not so much time to talk about the how. So we can easily say a transition to a circular economy by using a magic wand, and as such transform it into the desired direction. But this question about the how is, it's a very difficult one to answer. And within Climate Kick, of course, we do a lot of work about that a lot, but we don't have all the answers either, because we realize that, like the previous gentleman also said, say both society and industries might have some kind of willingness, but they only want to fix what is already within the current status quo. And we believe that it requires a systemic change of the value chains, a systemic change of governance, and as a result also of society. So, and Okay, systemic change, we also believe that it can and should be done through innovations. Not only technical or technological innovations, but also social innovations and in education. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit of your views on that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I acknowledge your kind of very kind criticism, let me put it like that. I mean, I think for us, we did really start off with almost that very innocent beginning in terms of, what data can we possibly bring together to tell a story. I think now we're at a point where we're still really showing, here's where we are, but also through modeling, here's where we could be. And I think that's actually still a very interesting pillar of the story is, this is, a magnitude for change that we could achieve. But then, well, maybe I can just flip over to that slide. That's really actually why I'd love to really get more into drivers, these drivers. So exactly the things that you mentioned, right? Like what are these cultural and social levers that we can pull, these innovations? What are the, the policies and the regulations? All of these need to work in harmony, and we need to know what they are. So in a sense, this is a bit of a new horizon for us, is also to show a bit of a, what would you call it? A bit of a logical framework between what we want to see happen at a high level, at a macroeconomic level, down to the individual actions that everybody in this room has some degree of control. I mean, yeah, there's so much to say here, and to be honest, I mean, I also share a lot of the frustration that these things are very tricky and take a long time to actually implement. But I think by showing that map to people and showing how you can affect change, that is very much an inspiring message and actually builds a lot onto what we're already doing.
All right, Matthew, question from home. It says, I'm currently trying to build a family home. Turns out using ecological, renewable material, whatever, possible almost doubles the price of the building. Why? And shouldn't it be the other way around? Well, that's easy to answer probably, but why? So could you want to take another one, or should we?
Yeah.
Let's take, so there are two likes for circularity needs a system change. The current model of capitalistic economy and prosperity will not be able to close the loops. It's trapped in growth. Maybe you want to, completely different questions, but answer it. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll answer them in reverse. I mean, I'm very much a fan of looking beyond growth. I mean, I think there are obvious limits to GDP as a metric. It doesn't tell us really what we're trying to do, right? So, I mean, going back to this optimization story, these are the things we care about on this side. These are the things we care about on the other side. We need to optimize in the middle. Yeah, so building a family home and kind of wood, from what I'm understanding, is expensive. I mean, I don't know exactly where. I'm assuming this person's maybe in Austria. Well, I mean, I think, yeah, there are limits, obviously, and that's also what I tried to point out here with regenerate. I mean, there's clear limits to how much we can push on our ecological systems like forests to produce wood. I think there's actually a lot of really inspiring examples like straw bale construction with hempcrete and actually things that are like more agricultural residue than high quality wood. And I think there's actually a lot of surprising examples that I think would be, I would say, very, very inexpensive. I think that there's a bit of an issue around scale, right? So getting those materials to market at a good price, at the right scale, also takes a huge amount of energy from a huge amount of investment in the economic side of that in terms of awareness raising. I mean, this also needs to come to public awareness. But I think there are solutions out there, but I can also appreciate very much that the actual market for secondary materials is basically non-existent. I mean, or very, very niche. And I think, also when looking at what needs to scale, we need a really well articulated and harmonized European market or even global market, to be honest, for secondary materials. And that's something that we don't have yet. So I mean, I would recognize that as a potential barrier.
Right, thank you. I will take two more questions. One on this side, because Harald will help me. You have a question yourself, Harald, or? Yeah. But you here, and then Sebastian, one more on your side, and then
thank you very much also
to Ms. Bolland,
my side.
just before the break.
Thank you very much also from my side. My name is Wolfgang Wimmer, Vienna University of Technology. We are working on the product, actually, for circularity, eco-design. I read the number 100 gigaton, right, of these materials extracted, and I read gap report. So my question now is, the gap to what we still have. Do you have numbers? Can you provide us here a perspective, not only on the side where we are using the resources, kind of, but also on the side of the not yet extracted resources? What is here? Do you also have some reliable numbers on this other gap that we are facing, especially when now everyone wants to start building weapons and so on? No? We need resources for all of that. No?
Yeah, I mean, to be completely transparent, I would have difficulty answering that question. I mean, that's not something that we really look into, but I think it is surprising. So over the past 5 years, we've used about 500 billion tons of materials. I quickly did the math, and I think that's almost as much as the whole 21st century. So again, exponential curve. For me, certainly the concept of a gap is there. I mean, I think if you look to other frameworks like One Planet Living, there are clear kind of thresholds on a per capita material footprint and things like that. I don't think, I would just want to acknowledge, I don't think that we're really bringing any new evidence there, but other than acknowledging that gap exists. I mean, to be completely honest, the way that I would conceive the gap is this. I mean, it is this image. We need to satisfy human needs on one side and just not go over critical ecological thresholds on the other. And I think the exciting story for me is I think there's all kinds of very interesting manipulations and configurations that we can find in the middle. And actually, I think that's the message that I would focus on.
Sebastian, please, one more question, and there is still...
So we will take one more question. I'm sorry, we will answer your question afterwards. I would like to give the voice to you.
Thank you. My name is Eva Waginger from Vienna University of Economics, and I have just one short question. What level of welfare did you use in your modeling? Did you consider the needs of other societies which are less wealthy? So that's all. Thank you.
That's actually a really good question. So actually in this report, we didn't really get into the needs side. In fact, we were basically implying that a lot of the circular economy solutions that we propose would basically fulfill needs in the same way. That's indeed a piece of the analysis that we didn't get into. We really measured basically what is almost the material emission nexus and what's sitting there. Well, I think that there is some literature on that that's actually coming out of Leeds University, actually Kate Rayworth and Donut Economics, where they actually talk more about provisioning systems, and I think that they kind of draw a line at around 7 out of 10 as a sort of aggregate score for human well-being is sort of the threshold that they use. But to be quite honest, I think you would probably want to define that at a more granular contextual level.
Vielen Dank, dass Sie da sind und bis gleich.